It is finally time for our main event of the evening, your featured lightweight bout, UFC 257. We have the rematch between Dustin the Diamond Poirier, Theo Von's favorite fighter, and the notorious Conor McGregor, seemingly everybody's favorite fighter. Matt, this is such a good fight stylistically. Again, it's almost like the rematch had to happen. You lump Max Holloway in there because he wants to be maybe an alternate for this one, and you have a true threes company up there at the top. But overall, such a great fight. I know with McGregor, you have the layoffs in between, but you pick out the wins. The Diaz win was great in the rematch. The Eddie Alvarez win, that was prime Conor McGregor. That's the best we've ever seen Conor McGregor look. And then in the fight, in the rematch, the return, when he took on Donald Cerrone, we had it as, and maybe controversially, our 2020 move of the year. One of our top 5 nominees was just the shoulder strikes from Conor McGregor. And Matt, we talked about this throughout this entire card. We've seen more boxing moves kind of employed in MMA. You saw it with Carlos Felipe and Justin Tafa last weekend. Head-to-head, we're going boxing. Ottman Azaitar, who's on this card, taking on Matt Frevola, going wild to the head, and then when he notices his opponent's hurt, he'll go to the body. McGregor in that fight going in for the clinch, shoulder strikes, back off. You have the kick. You have so many great moves from Conor McGregor, and it almost looked like he hadn't missed a step in that fight. He really did look good going into
he looked phenomenal against Cowboy, but here's the couple things you have to remember. Cowboy had been knocked out in 2 straight fights leading into that, and that fight was up at 170, and this is something that it always gets brought up when they talk about Roy Jones Jr., how once he went up to heavyweight, he was never really able to come back down in weight. It was just, once you do let your body get to a certain size, the weight cutting doesn't get easier as you get older, and a lot of people were worried about that for Canelo, for instance, after he went out and fought Kovalev. For McGregor, I don't think it will be an issue because we've seen him fight Nate Diaz at 170 and then come down and fight at 155. Just something you always do have to think about when you do deal with a fighter who can switch weight classes because, listen, Conor McGregor at 32 is not the same fighter that we got back in the Eddie Alvarez days. And Bill Simmons once did this on The Ringer where he didn't just make a basketball team, but he took like the vintages. Like if you took every fighter and you just took their best fight, like what would they look the best in? The Eddie Alvarez fight for Conor McGregor was as perfect of a fight as you can possibly have. And listen, I love Eddie Alvarez. And the fact that he was able to go out there and really just have like a flawless performance against Alvarez means really more than anything else you could do in the UFC. Everything that happened after that, though, has definitely changed him as a fighter. You have that massive layoff. You've got the weird Bellator thing where he jumps into the cage. You've got the whole bus incident. And you've got the Khabib fight. And I know people are trying to start this narrative. Really, Conor's the one who's been starting it. And he has a lot of fans, so people are going to reverberate what he says. Is that, oh, he's scared of me and he's running. It's not the case at all. Let's just be honest and say this right now. If Khabib wanted to fight either one of these guys, he would. Because here's the thing. Khabib's already fought both of these guys and beaten them both. And I love Dustin Poirier. By far my favorite fighter. I don't mind being a little bit biased and admitting that. I don't even want to see him fight Khabib again. Like, that fight was one-sided enough where I'm like, okay, he probably doesn't beat him. But with Conor, quit trying to lie to your fans to change the whole narrative.
The weirdest narrative that I've seen going into this fight is that we're just totally forgetting about the Donald Cerrone fight that started 2020. Yeah, 2020, because we're 2021 now. It's difficult sometimes. And a lot of people are saying, look at how poor Conor looked going into fight week against Khabib. That was the reason why he lost that fight. They cut to the press conference where he was drinking, and they cut to this and that. And, well, he wasn't in fight shape for that one. But he's in fight shape for Dustin Poirier. Did you forget the fight against Cerrone? I get it. Donald Cerrone was on a downtick, a massive downtick.
Still is.
He hasn't looked like the same fighter for a while when he became Father Cerrone. But going into that one, Conor looked great. He looked amazing, and he said all the right things. He was very complimentary to the division. He was complimentary to Cerrone. You saw the exchange that he had with Cowboy's grandmother. Like, it was a wholesome Conor McGregor. We saw all the things that we needed to see. But it's almost like for a lot of people, that didn't even happen. And he's been a lot like this coming into this fight with Dustin Poirier, complimenting Poirier. It's a fight that needed to happen. He's in fight shape. And you see him in camp, shaved head, smaller beard, and he looks good. Like, he doesn't look totally drawn out.
He's handsome, no.
Well,
that short beard.
He looks drawn. He doesn't look drawn out like he used to at featherweight, and he looks good for 155 pounds. And at 32, you're in your physical prime. So we'll have to see how all of that goes for him. At the same time, Dustin's celebrating a birthday, coming in here at the ripe old age of 32 years and 4 days for this fight. So happy birthday, Dustin Poirier. And from Poirier, the thing that I worried about was after the Khabib loss, he was talking about retirement. I mean, Khabib was very complimentary with him. He had a major hip operation, and then he goes in there and he took a long time off between the Khabib fight and the fight against Dan Hooker, almost a year. And I was really worried about that because you go into a fight with Dan Hooker, and we talked about it, Hooker against Chandler. What's Hooker good at? Straight shots up the middle, elbows, knees, the jab, the cross. Like, you have to worry about a lot of things with Dan Hooker, but not a lot of looping shots. If Dustin Poirier is going to close the distance, he could get hit. And Dustin Poirier has great whipping leg kicks. Will he end up being like a Jose Aldo before his fight against Marlon Vera, where it's like, we have hip issues, we have knee issues, we're not going to kick anymore? Because you know how good Dustin Poirier's boxing is. It's some of the best boxing in MMA.
And okay, we've been saying that a little too much just because like Poirier and Kattar just fought, or Holloway and Kattar just fought. I can't stress this enough. Outside of Poirier and Kattar, and it just so happens that their main events in the same week, this would normally be the best boxing MMA matchup of the year. Like, Conor McGregor fought Floyd Mayweather. Don't know if you guys remember that. But also, Dustin Poirier, as a pure boxer in MMA, is absolutely phenomenal. Can switch stances really well, good defensively as well. And something I like from Poirier, I noticed this a long time ago. I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit. He's right-handed, but he fights as a southpaw, and it didn't make any sense to me. But when you watch him fight, he loads up on his right hand a lot. When he gets a guy hurt, he'll hit them with a left hand, and they'll kind of load up on the right and switch stances. It's something really smart that he does, and it's also very Michael Bisping-esque, where Bisping, he was left-handed, but he fought orthodox because he wanted his power hand to be close. And Poirier, a really good diversity of strikes off of his right hand, because he will throw a check right hook, he will throw a left straight into an overhand right. I really like his combinations moving forward. We saw that a lot against Dan Hooker, where Dan Hooker would land his combo or move forward on Poirier, and Poirier just kind of gets to this point where either his back's against the cage or he's just been in a crazy fight. He just gets this look on his face, he's like, fuck, another one of these ones. And it just, all of his fights end up that way, where he's going to be in there, and it's going to be one of those blood and guts type of fights. And I don't really like what I was hearing out of Conor McGregor leading up into this fight, where I'm going to knock him out faster than I did in the first one. I can't guarantee you much in life. I can guarantee you this fight is not going to end quick. I do see one of those drawn-out brawls between these guys. I see this fight going a lot more in the way of like a Nate Diaz-Conor McGregor fight than I do as a Conor versus Eddie. Because for Dustin, and again, we talked about it a little bit before bringing up the Dan Hooker fight, one of the more underrated ground games, not only in the lightweight division, I would argue in the whole of the UFC. Dustin, a really good black belt, great submissions, and a nice diversity of submissions too. He's got a phenomenal Darce choke. He goes for omoplatas. It's something that doesn't get brought up enough about him, and I feel like it should. People are always like, Jose Aldo, he does have that black belt in jiu-jitsu, but we just never see it. Poirier's in that same boat. It's just his striking is so good, we don't have to see it. But when we do see it, Dustin Poirier on the ground is a problem.
And I mean, maybe you'll end up seeing Dustin Poirier riding on top of Conor McGregor like he did Jose Aldo on top of Marlon Vera in his last fight. And if you want to go back and cue that fight up, it was a great one. But for Dustin Poirier, if you think it's going to be a knock him out, drag him out type of fight, and you're questioning Conor McGregor's cardio, hey, maybe there's a great opportunity for Dustin Poirier in this one. And if you look at their overall career since they fought each other back in 2014, McGregor finishes that one. Poirier rattles off 4 big wins. Carlos Diego Ferreira, who was young in his career, Yancy Medeiros finishes him, beats Conor's buddy Joe Duffy, beats Bobby Green, loses to Michael Johnson, but Michael Johnson at one point was absolutely in fuego. Beats Jim Miller. There's a no contest that was really weird against Eddie Alvarez. Rattles off another big, long win streak. And listen, you got to say it. Former champion Anthony Pettis.
Destroyed him.
Later interim champ Justin Gaethje.
Knocked him out.
Former champ Eddie Alvarez in the rematch.
Knocked him out.
Featherweight champ that was moving up to lightweight and Max Holloway. And then he lost to Khabib. And then he has a fight of the year against Dan Hooker. Possible fight of the year last year. Round of the year for sure in the second round. For McGregor, since he beat Dustin Poirier, a very important fight. He fought Dennis Seaver in one of the weirdest fights that you could ever make.
The ultimate underhand toss.
He beats Chad Mendes, which was a really good win. That's one of my favorite Conor McGregor wins because, again, you had to see him perform against a great wrestler. He performed through adversity and finished him in the second round. Starches Jose Aldo in the biggest highlight reel knockout you've probably ever seen. Diaz fights Alvarez, Khabib, and Cerrone. And now you come into this fight. So obviously Poirier's had more fights in that stretch. The big win for me that really stands out for Dustin Poirier is the win over Anthony Pettis, if I could really put things together. And we talked about this before we came on air. But for Anthony Pettis, what does he do well? When he gets into a rhythm of his own and his kicks are great, look at the fight that Anthony Pettis had, even in his last time out. And I get it. Pettis, when he fought Benson Henderson in WEC, Pettis, when he fought for the title in the UFC, is a totally different Pettis than the one that we saw fight Morono up a weight class before he left for the PFL. But Anthony Pettis, when he flows, his striking's amazing. When he has confidence, he looks great. Dustin Poirier stifled that, got it to the ground. I know there was a rib injury to Pettis, but still, the way that Poirier finishes that fight or gets to the finish If you like that Dustin Poirier, then you love him in this fight.
I do. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I think that's a great fight to showcase how good his ground game is, but I really do think the fight that you can draw the most from is that Max Holloway or even the Gaethje fight. And Gaethje's a little interesting because the story about Poirier, at least at 145, was always chinny. He can't take a shot all that well. He would get dropped or at least rocked in most of his fights. At 155, his chin's not only granite, like he has one of the best chins ever at 155, I would argue. The amount of shots he was able to eat from guys like Gaethje and Pettis and Hooker and Holloway, like Poirier in the Gaethje fight, he got hurt and came back, and we had never seen that before that fight. And it's wild to think that that was in 2018. Like, it had taken that long for him to actually get into a situation in his career where he gets rocked by a shot, he has to come back and win. That third round, let's just showcase the fight quick. Gaethje's landing a ton of leg kicks, but Poirier's landing better to the head. In the third round, though, Gaethje, the leg kicks are starting to add up. Poirier's looking tired, and Gaethje lands a clean overhand right that hurts Poirier. Poirier gets his back up against the cage. He's smart defensively, works his way to the end of that round, and then knocks out Eddie Alvarez knocks out Justin Gaethje about 10 seconds into the fourth round. Like, if you don't get Poirier out of there when you have the chance to, he just doesn't go away. And Luke Thomas brought it up, something I like to laugh about too. Poirier looks exhausted the second he walks into the cage. Like, he'll throw 2 overhands, and he's just... I'm like, no. This is when, like, the hands of time, all the wars are starting to catch up to him. Doesn't really get tired, though. Like, some of the better cardio in the UFC, and it's weird because he can match together a high volume with a good level of power and keep a pretty sustained volume throughout all 5 rounds, which is something we don't see often. And he's a guy who will weaponize his pace if he has to. He doesn't always rely on that. In the Holloway fight, it was more, I just have to keep pace with Holloway, not let him run away at the end. Whereas with the Dan Hooker fight, it was Dan Hooker started out strong, and Poirier was the one who had to outlast him. So he can fight in both those styles, and it'll be interesting to see what he decides to do with Conor. Will Dustin shoot for a takedown in this fight? Because I think it will be interesting. If he does at least shoot for takedowns and make Conor think about the ground game being a threat, it'll open up the rest of his arsenal, I think, quite nicely. Whereas for Conor, he's not going to be shooting any takedowns. We know that. For Conor, I'm just curious how many kicks is he going to throw? We've seen kick-heavy Conor, and we've seen boxing-heavy Conor. We've never really seen both. I bring up the Eddie Alvarez fight. Don't even really think he threw a kick in that fight. It was just, I'm really sound boxing. I'm going to have really nice trunk movement, move back and forth like a viper. And then we see in his fight against Cowboy, he throws one head kick, even in the first Poirier fight. Like, he throws that weird hook kick. He has a nice assortment of strikes. It just always depends on when he wants to use them and when he doesn't want to use them.
Conor McGregor in the fight against Eddie Alvarez threw 1 leg kick.
There you go.
3% of his overall strikes. But you're right. With Conor McGregor, if he strings everything together, and listen, you're talking about the best MMA fighter, the most popular MMA fighter of all time. It's hard to really nitpick.
Let's not say he's the best of all time. We don't need that to be the hot take of the podcast.
It's hard not to, or it is hard to nitpick certain things. So in that Cerrone fight, again, perfect fight against a guy that was definitely on the downtick. It's a great win to put your name back out there. And obviously, if we had stadium shows, you probably would have seen him a few more times last year. But you didn't. So you get this fight with, 2,000 fans in attendance or so out of the arena that they have. It's not the small Fight Island stage in a tent. It's a full-size arena show here. It should be a really good one. And again, you bring up styles make fights. Dustin Poirier looking tired. And even with his back up against the cage, so many different attacks in Dustin Poirier's arsenal, even from that spot.
He landed one just combination against Dan Hooker, and I was shaking my head because Dustin Poirier, like, when it's right, he almost looks too good. Like, there's some points in Poirier fights where he has his back up against the cage, lands a jab and a straight left, moves out of the way of, like, 2 Hooker shots. It just kind of gives him a look like, really? You think you can hit me with those? And, of course, that fight was really ugly, but there's always portions in his fights where you look and you're like, okay, if he decided not to be this crazy, exciting brawler, technically he would be able to beat most guys in the division. Just the fact that Dustin Poirier, listen, there's a reason he's one of the more popular fighters in the UFC. I'm one of those OG fans, and I can ride that train really until he retires. But he's picked up a lot of steam, I would say, outside of just fight fans. Poirier's become, not to say he's transcended the sport by any means, but he's one of the more well-known MMA fighters at this point, I would argue. And I would just really, the only thing I want out of this fight is the best version out of both guys. Like, if Conor goes out there and starches a really good version of Poirier, if he makes it into the 4th round, let's say, and lands a nice shot, that's really all you can hope for. If Poirier, let's say, gets hurt in the first round, overcomes it, and comes back and beats Conor, like, that's all I can hope for out of this fight, because it is so hard to predict. You have 2 guys who are so good at finishing fights in such a plethora of different ways that it just makes this fight very exciting.
It's hot sauce versus whiskey. And I mean, for Dustin Poirier, you look at his overall wins, 7 of them by decision, 13 by knockout, 6 by submission. For McGregor, this is the craziest thing. Out of all the wins, 22 of them, 19 are by knockout, 1 by submission, 2 by decision. And you look at the decision wins. One's over Max Holloway, which is very early on, this is the one thing I don't like. Everybody says it's so early on in Max Holloway's career, and it is. He only had 9 pro fights. Still pretty early on in Conor McGregor's career, too, and they were still both young at the time. And then the other decision win was in the Nate Diaz rematch at 155 pounds, down from 170. That fight was close, though. It was close.
And the Holloway fight, okay, Conor was already champ over in Cage Warriors. It's not like he was that young. Like, he had quite a bit more experience than Holloway back then. I don't think you can take a lot of stock. And I'm sure I've already seen it on Twitter. People are like, oh, you think Holloway's good. Just wait till you see Conor on Saturday. Like, when you tweet stuff like that, you might as well just put in your bio, I'm a casual. But just to get back on track, Conor McGregor has so many different ways to win this fight. But the same can be said for Poirier. The only difference is that I would say the most likely to get a knockout, of course, is McGregor, but there is a 0% chance he submits Dustin Poirier in this fight. Even if he's able to hurt him, I don't think the ground game of McGregor is good enough to like take the back of Poirier or anything. Where on the flip side, if Conor does start to get tired, which is a theme in all of his fights, and you can look at Dustin and say, well, he looks tired in his fights, but in the 5th round, he's still pretty much as fresh as he was in the 2nd, whereas with Conor, the pace definitely will get to him at a certain point. It's just he's starting at such a high level. Even Conor at 80% is still better than most other guys. I do worry about the cardiovascular Conor making his way back down to 155. That's really the thing. The added weight cut that he hasn't had to do in a number of years now, along with the fact that his cardio has always been a bit of a question mark, it does worry me. What is this fight going to look like in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round?
If it makes it there, and that's a big thing, because if you're really in the corner of Conor McGregor, he's got to get it done early. If you're Dustin Poirier, rounds 3, 4, and 5, they're yours, and he should be able to get a win, you would think. The one thing that a lot of people point out, you're right, and you get the contrarians that say it, Conor McGregor throughout his career, even with the Khabib fight being heavily weighted in terms of discounting the stat, 70% takedown defense throughout his career for Conor McGregor. His ground game, while offensively isn't that great, defensively very sound, and that's something that you have to point out.
I think a great comp for his ground game is Alexander Gustafsson. He's got great takedown defense, and his first move to get back up is really nice, but you can hold him down if you're able to control him. Chad Mendes is really able to prove that. The way that you kind of knew Khabib was going to beat Conor was Chad Mendes mounted Conor in like 40 seconds of their fight. And of course, Chad Mendes is a phenomenal wrestler. Like, I'm not predicting that for Dustin, of course, but we have seen that. I think the ground game of Conor is good, but I don't see it as a ground game. I see it almost as an extension of his striking, where my ground game is just getting back up to my feet. And I do like that. If you know what you're good at, just do what you're good at.
It's like a lighter Derek Lewis. You just got to get right back up.
No, it really is.
Back up. So in this fight, again, McGregor, it's got to be fast. It's got to be quick. You know the speed and the power. And speed and power aren't a combination that you normally get. It's usually volume and speed.
Timing beats power, though.
Timing beats power. So we'll see what happens. If we look at the overall votes on Tapology, 764 of them early, 73% McGregor, 90% see McGregor winning by knockout. If you look at Poirier, 27% of fans have him to win, 36% by decision, 24% by submission, 33% by knockout. If we have a look at the odds, heavily skewed Ireland's way. Poirier open to plus 150, now plus 230 underdog. McGregor minus 175 open. He's now a minus 290 favorite, and that line continues to go for Conor McGregor.
So if I could just do a minute on the odds, please. If Conor McGregor ever fights, just bet on whoever he's fighting against as early as possible. That's all you have to do. Or no, sorry, as late as possible. Because this is what happens with every Conor fight. He was the favorite over Khabib. Like, people don't really understand this. There's such a, and I hate using this word because it's not 100% true. There's such a huge amount of casuals who do come over and watch when Conor fights. And he's one of the few fighters who, he has fans outside of just the fight world. Like, we can talk about how Poirier is a big star, but he's a big star in the fight world. Whereas Conor, he's been really able to transcend just MMA. And he brings in so many more eyeballs that aren't normally adjusted to this sport. I think we could both agree, if we had to set odds on this fight, I might be a little out there. I would probably have Poirier at like a minus 150, and that would be the most generous towards Poirier.
McGregor. I would say McGregor, where the open, minus 175, plus 150
I'm
Poirier.
fine with that as well.
That makes sense.
It's ridiculous to see where they've come to, though, and it's just the case for every Conor fight.
And for me, yeah, I mean, at a minus 290, I'm not going to take a flyer on Conor McGregor. You might feel more than confident with that at home. And if you're a big Dustin Poirier supporter, again, like I said, rounds 3, 4, and 5, if we make it that far, Dustin Poirier can outlast just about anybody. You saw that in the fight against Dan Hooker. As the fight wears on, I mean, I hate to use a cliche, but he's battle-tested. So you've seen it out of him.
Max Holloway.
The Khabib fight, not the best one, but the Max Holloway fight, the Dan Hooker fight. And the thing that worried me about Dustin Poirier going into the fight against Dan Hooker, that hip issue, well, he continued to whip kicks out there. He always fights at a bit of a labored pace, but he stays on that bike the whole fight long. You don't really have to worry about him dropping off. Whereas Conor McGregor, whether it's at 170 or 155. The longer the fight goes on, that power bar continues to be diminished. So if you want Conor McGregor to win and you take him at his word that he said in interviews and social media, he's probably got to get it done in the first or second round, because if it goes on any longer, it's just kind of going into the hands of Dustin Poirier. If you're making a pick on this one, Matt, because we predicted it from just about every angle, who are you going with here?
If we've learned anything over the last, I'll just say year and a half, skills beat the knockout artist. And you can even just look at last weekend's main event. Max Holloway was the more skilled fighter than Calvin Kattar, but Kattar hit quite a bit harder than Holloway. Paulo Costa, Israel Adesanya. Costa definitely hits harder than Adesanya, but if you are really cerebral and if you are good enough defensively, you can overcome just the sheer power. And the fact that Conor has something else in common with those two other guys, his cardio is not great, and he will fade as the fight progresses. Whereas Dustin can go out there and have a bad first round. I won't be that worried. Whereas if Conor has a bad first round, things are just going to keep on getting worse for him as the fight progresses. And the other thing too, I see Dustin becoming more wrestling heavy as the fight progresses. I see him almost doing the Dan Hooker, and not because he'll be the one who's tired, but I do see Dustin as having quite a bit of an advantage on the mat, and especially if McGregor's starting to get tired and Dustin, whose cardio does seem to stay pretty much at the same pace throughout the whole fight, if by round 4, Conor, the fight's starting to get to him and he is getting tired, and if he shoots for a lazy takedown, or if Poirier's the one on top, he's going to absolutely dominate him there. I really like Dustin Poirier. If he doesn't get knocked out in the first round, I think it's his fight all night long.
I'm going to take speed in this fight, Matt, because again, speed and power, and as long as you're not overly tentative. You saw it in the fight with Holloway and Kattar, the fact that Kattar couldn't figure out the amount of sheer volume that Max Holloway was throwing on him. Holloway didn't even take time to reset.
So you predict McGregor will land over 800 strikes?
That probably won't happen. The same thing with Paulo Costa. Costa couldn't figure out Israel Adesanya whatsoever. And listen, this is such a great fight. It's a hard fight to even try and pick. The one thing that I really want to see is these two guys standing side by each at 155 pounds on weigh-in day when we go into this fight with question mark kicks on the Saturday, and I can say confidently, I'm going with fighter A or fighter B. But again, based on previous track record, you have to think. And listen, mind games, do they really play a factor? McGregor's the best at mind games out of all of MMA. It didn't work on Nate Diaz because he's about as dense as this sound wall.
It's kind of hard to talk shit about Dustin Poirier in 2021. Like, what are you going to do?
True.
Oh, you're exciting and you do a lot of work for charity? Like, oh, wow, I really want to see you knock him out. Like, it's one of the more difficult opponents, I would say, to really get into their head right now.
That's true. But overall, I do like McGregor in this one. Again, the speed advantage, the just... A McGregor first round is tough to beat, so I will go with a McGregor first round in this one. We're differing on the picks, but Matt, I could not be more excited about this card. McGregor, Poirier, Hooker, Chandler, Azaitar, Frevola, Calderwood. Like, there's so many good fights. Tsarukyan taking on Nasrat Haqparast, Sanchez, Muradov. There's so many good fights. I can't stress it enough. Make sure you go back and check them out all the way from Albazi, Zhumagulov, up here to our main event. It's been a crazy last calendar year for Fight Night picks, really. I mean, it was all on the heels of McGregor and Cerrone that we were able to pick things up and get to the point that we're at right now. It's all thanks to the fans out there. You've been supporting us with the merch at FightNightPicks.com, checking out the articles, the podcasts out there, the recap shows with Matt and John Franklin, early stoppage with myself and John Franklin, all sorts of great stuff going on at Fight Night Picks. So make sure you check out the rest of the content with the team. Toss us a like and the sub. We really do appreciate it. And Matt, as we always say with Fight Night Picks,
let's get into it.